Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Educator Yarns. This is Jess and I'm here with Belinda. So today we're going to be talking about RAP actions, but before we dive in and have a big yarn with you about some of the mandatory RAP actions and give you some tips and tricks of what you can do, we'd like to acknowledge country. So we're both on Dark and Young country today, and we'd like to pay our respects to elders, both past, present and emerging, and acknowledge any deadly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander listeners that are tuning into this episode. So thanks everyone for being here. So what we decided to do is I put a little call out in the Koori Curriculum Club asking some of our members what RAP actions they struggle with the most and why. And I guess the two that most did was making community connections and exploring current affairs and issues. But we did have one of our members, Michelle, who is just asking for advice and suggestions first on how to actually begin on the journey. So she's a very new director and a little bit overwhelmed and not quite sure where to start. So, Belinda, what do you sort of say to educators that are just starting out on this reconciliation journey? What sort of tips do you give them?
Well, I think, hey, everyone, first of all, I think when we're talking about starting the RAP, like there's just some super basic things that we've got to think about. So the first step is establishing your RAP working party. So I always recommend that you don't want to have too many educators in there because you do have to be mindful of having community members, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the committee. So I guess either I don't know what you think about this, Jess. Do you kind of think that it's best to approach people for the committee within the service that have a passion for this area, or do you kind of like to space it across so that someone is represented from every age group?
Yeah, I think with working groups, what I've tried to do with my thing to get my head around it, because whilst I think there has to be sort of like the managing working group that comes together. And what I try to say is that, like, if you're like a long day care service, for example, that you might have a representative from each of the rooms that comes and attends the management working group committee, and that's with, you know, your ELs and director and community stakeholders and so forth as well. But I'm a little bit different because I try to encourage all educators to be in the RAP working group. So you're not in the RAP working group, you can't be assigned actions. So then we kind of can look at having sub-working groups as well. So whilst you might have this committee that sits at the top that sort of is overarching and managing all of it, then underneath that, so say you've got 3 rooms at your service, and each of the rooms you might be exploring acknowledgement of country, and that might be assigned to 3 different educators, one in the nursery, toddlers and preschoolers. So then those 3 educators can come together for a little meeting as well to have a yarn about that. So you've got like these sub-working groups that come off. So that's how I run it. But you go and you share what you sort of do, and then because there's different options, and this is the thing, it's about what works for you. There's no blanket approach.
There's no one way, absolutely. Well, I just think, you know, because I'm currently involved in, I just checked my RAP, currently involved in 8 RAP committees in different early childhood services just as a community member. And so I guess what I would recommend is sort of looking at people that have areas of passion or spreading it across the different rooms. I just find, you know, with our school, with our RAP, what I didn't like so much was that we had so many teachers and like a handful of community members. But what I was kind of noticing is that it was sort of being like the conversation at the meetings was not balanced between like the teachers, and like, you know, our teachers are amazing and they're doing wonderful things, but I wanted there to be more space for Aboriginal people in the committee to be able to have more of a platform about and more of a say, because I think that's super important. We have to privilege Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voices throughout the RAP process and be guided by that. So certainly I think the first step would be in terms of establishing your working party, figuring out also how long the frequency will be of the meetings and how you're going to do that. Are you going to do it on Zoom? Are you going to do it face-to-face? And it's about knowing your audience, like whoever's in the committee, because some people will prefer to come face-to-face and sit down and have a yarn, and you can have afternoon tea or whatever. At our school, it's now gone online because the families have requested it to be online, so that because, you know, we've got working families and it's just easier that way. But I think it is important to establish from the beginning a frequency of when you're going to do it, because what I find in my experience of this is that often people start the wrap, and then because it's not like set out in any particular way of how that will happen or when it's going to happen or for how long, like they just kind of forget about it, and it takes years and years and it's just sitting there in draft mode. So and then I guess like a really important part of like setting it up is doing the Narragansett platform's amazing and it's got everything on there. I think that staff reflection is amazing because it tells you where to go and what areas as a whole that your staff may be challenged in. That's kind of what do you reckon, Jess?
Yeah, 100%. So I think some services that I work with, particularly family daycare educators, they really struggle with Narragansett because they find having 14 mandatory actions overwhelming when there's only them. So there's lots of different service types. And so some services that I work with, particularly smaller ones, to start off with, we just begin with doing reconciliation commitment statements. So what does that reconciliation mean to you? What does it look like in the early years? And how are you actively going to be contributing to reconciliation in your space? And so it's just a statement with some of those deliverables or their commitments. So what are their commitments to reconciliation? So whether that is to connect more with community, then we would take that and we would turn that into a little action plan. And so this is just sort of a stepping stone into Narragansett. Okay. Yeah. So some people just start back there, really focusing on what it means to them individually. So again, that works really well for family daycare educators and some smaller preschools and organisations. So we go through that in our programming, planning and pedagogy sessions for anyone who's interested in learning more about reconciliation commitment statements. But with Narragansett, I think having the working group, but one of the things that I know that educators will ask is like, how do you actually go about approaching community members to be a part of your RAP working group? So I hope you don't mind me asking you this. So the 8 working groups that you are sitting on, Belinda, like for your time, are you charging them a fee to participate, to consult, to be a part of that working group? Like, how does that work for you as a community member?
I guess it would be, so part of my work with freshwater education is going out to services and, you know, mentoring and guiding them on embedding Aboriginal perspectives. And often what I'm asked as part of that is advice on the RAP. So it's kind of like part of my work with them. But then I guess that's a kind of a really good question, because once this is short-term mentoring, you know, I'm going there for like maybe 4 to 6 visits. And then kind of in saying that, what happens afterwards is that it kind of just drops off, because I'm at that point, you know, like working on 7 RAPs while working 4 jobs. I can't volunteer my time to do that. You know what I mean?
And this is the same situation. Really that a lot of people will find themselves in, community members will find themselves in. So like for me, I'll volunteer my time to be on the RAP that where my child goes to school.
Me too.
So that's different. So as a parent, I'll do that. However, like I sit across many RAPs. So I sit across lots and lots. And most of the time, these are services or organisations that I work with doing training or professional development. So I might be working with them this year. And when I catch up with them to do training, we might have a little consult about a RAP action that they're stuck on. Some people will buy coaching packages with me. And with those coaching packages, they use one of those sessions for me to come and attend their RAP meeting, and we'll discuss the actions that are on the agenda for that meeting that need to be reviewed, that they need strategies with, and so forth. For me, though, I only mentor people that have done training with me, because otherwise I chase my tail, because mentoring and being a RAP committee member is not the same as giving professional development. So I do think if you're looking to have community representation on your RAP working group, I think families can volunteer their time. I don't think they should be asked to volunteer their time. I think you put an invitation out to all families, and it shouldn't just be your Aboriginal families, all families. And, you know, if your Aboriginal family say, yes, they would like to be involved, that's great, you know. But I feel that with community members, if you're approaching elders in your community or consultants in your community to come and be a part of your RAP working group, there needs to be some sort of a fee or a budget set aside to pay them for their time. And I say this because like we sit on reference groups and working groups for people like BU or Play School or Hippie or whatever. And so it's the same. We charge a fee to go and be a part of those working groups and reference groups. It's just, it's what's done. It's our time and it's our professional and cultural knowledge that you're asking for. So I think that has to be considered too. So
100%. And especially, I guess, if you don't have that already established relationship with a service, you know, if you're reaching out to Aboriginal people and you're beginning to develop that relationship, it's kind of like, well, you know, our mob are like overextended because, you know, within communities, as we know, that we're going, like, people are going to the same people within communities, like the same group, like, you know, elders, like the same groups of elders, the same organizations or whatnot. And there's like such a sense of, sorry guys, my dog is just kind of going, I might take her out in a second. She's going a bit crazy here in the background. Yeah, like there's just this sense of burnout. So it's like we do have to be mindful of making sure that we're, showing appreciation for like cultural knowledge and time, just as we would for any other consultant or service provider that comes out, you know?
Yeah. So I think, so your RAP working group is a must. So you could do it the way that you're sort of suggesting, in the sense that you just have a few key people, and then those people are, you know, responsible for, you know, sharing that information with others that are in their room or in their classroom or so forth, so that they're the spokesperson that feeds that info back to their group. Or you could have sub-working groups, which is something that I quite like doing when we look at, you know, different actions and we assign deliverables to people, because I sort of think, for me, the RAP is a tool to bring about cultural change, and to bring about cultural change, everybody needs to be involved in the process. Too often I've just seen directors and ELs doing the RAP, and it actually has no effect on the people that are, you know, in the classroom with the children. So trying to think about how everybody is actually responsible for reconciliation, everybody is aware and understanding, and how you can bring that towards, you know, to the forefront. So doing little things like having a RAP action as an agenda item at each staff meeting is something that I recommend educators do, to keep it at the forefront, so it's not just forgotten about. Then, so the platform that for those that aren't aware, so just to backtrack a second, is Narragawnawali, which is through Reconciliation Australia. And Narragawnawali is a Ngunnawal word, which means alive, wellbeing and peace. And it is specifically set up for early learning services, primary schools, secondary schools, family daycare services and bush services. So this is different to RAPs that are for businesses and organisations. So say if you're a Good Start service, you'll have an organisational RAP, as KU has an organisational RAP, and that is different to Narragawnawali, which is for early learning services. The answer that I would say is that, you know, you should have both. So you should have an organisational RAP and service-specific RAPs. They do very different things. So, but they can complement and feed into one another. I don't really think it matters which one comes first, because they're both different. But I would recommend having both. So you set up through Narragawnawali, and it's a free program to do so. So you just type in your centre details and it should come up for you. There are features like having cluster RAPs, and I don't know if you've ever worked with a service that has a cluster RAP, Belinda, but personally I'm not a fan of them, because even if you're...
I don't even know what that is. What's a cluster RAP?
Cluster RAP is like when you can have like 3 services joined together on the one reconciliation action plan. So this might be that like there's one owner that has 3 services, or 3 family daycare educators want to join together and work together on the one reconciliation action plan. The issue with the cluster RAP is that even though your service is small, you have different families, you have educators there that have different knowledge and experiences, and you know, it's different. So each of those services, is when they sit down to do their reflection survey, their answers are different. You know, their ability and their capacity to implement things is different. So it gets really confusing. Whilst I think that the easier thing to do is that you all have your own RAP, and then you potentially sit on each other's working groups, so you can support each other and collaborate that way, you know, like but keep your own RAP is my recommendation.
100%. It has to be like individual and contextualized, because even if you're thinking about, even like you might be in the next suburb to the person, a colleague that you wanted to do a cluster RAP with, but you might be on another country within that 5-minute boundary. You know, and then the experiences with families or I certainly would agree with what you're saying too, Jess.
Yeah. I mean, like, it may work well, and I'm happy for somebody, like, you know, that's listening, that it works well for you to come and share with us, and happy to share what you guys do as well. But for me, I've just never seen it work well. And then it's really painful to then separate once you're in a cluster app, to then unseparate you. So that's just been my experience with it. So then you've got you've registered, you've got your RAP working group, and then you write your vision. And I think your vision is something that, you know, it can be very basic to start with, but it will grow over time, but just really something simple. As I said, what does reconciliation mean to you, and what is it that you believe reconciliation should look like in the early years? That's essentially your vision. And it's not about saying what you've done. This isn't a space that you say about, well, we do these things. It's about what you hope to achieve and what you hope to bring about. And then you have your actions. So I think there's like 14 mandatory actions or something like that. And then there are others that are recommended or optional, whatever. I always just say, like, start with the 14 mandatory, because this is your foundation. So just start with that. And there's no, like, you don't have to do all of them. Just because they're mandatory doesn't mean you have to do all of them. You can just do a couple at a time. I think that's being realistic, as well as thinking about your time commitment. How much time do you have to invest? Because whilst the RAP itself is free to set up, some of these things, there is a cost associated with them. To pay for services or buy resources or attend events or whatever it may be. But the cost mainly is your time. So getting you off the floor, because you can't just do this with no time to actually invest in doing RAP work. You need RAP programming time. 14 mandatory is where I start. So how does that sort of work with you, Belinda? Like, you start with a survey, then work out what actions fit best for the centre, what ones they should prioritise?
No, I do exactly the same, like, start with the mandatory ones only, and then, you know, after they publish their RAP, like, that's my suggestion anyway. You know, if they certainly want to go ahead and do extra ones that fit their context, then, you know, I encourage them to do so. But I certainly would otherwise say, you know, once you publish your RAP, then perhaps as you continue to reflect on it, then maybe look at further extending some of those non-mandatory RAP actions. But certainly, in terms of, do you kind of recommend a time frame of what you think services, like, I guess it depends on how long, or, you know, how in between meetings, or who's doing the actions and all of the budget and stuff. But do you generally sort of suggest like a 12-month time frame, or how do you go with it?
So the overall action itself, I just have it as ongoing, because it's always there. It's kind of like you keep coming back, you keep revisiting and keep going back and delving deeper and delving deeper. But where the time frame is really the deliverables. And so I use the list of deliverables as those little stepping stones that work your way up to the overarching goal that you're hoping to achieve. And I use those a lot and have really strict timeframes associated with them. And as I'm creating that with educators, so when I do a mentoring session, we probably will work on 2 actions together, and I'll do that very in depth with them, so they see how much detail has to be put in place, and that's like the sense of truth, right? So you come and you know, sit down together and sort of say, okay, so we want to have an elder in residency program at our service, for example, for argument's sake. And that's one of the questions that we've had anyway, like, how do we make connections with community? So before we worry about an elder in residency program, the first step here is like, let's create a community stakeholders list. So how do we need to sit down and we need to identify who is in your community and what they need to do, the different roles that they play. So that might be deliverable number 1. The second step might be to look at protocols. So what are the protocols for engagement in your area? How do you make contact with elders? Who are the elders in your area? You know, remuneration, terminology, all of those things, to make sure that when you are connecting, that you're doing that respectfully. Then we might sit down and actually go, well, what is it that you're wanting community to do? Like, is it that you want, like, you know, why elders, for example? Because that's something that comes through. It's come through in our thread here today with questions from our community, is, you know, how do we get in contact with the elders? And I think that's become just the go-to. But it's like, for me, elders don't come to you, you go to elders. So, and the role that our elders play is not the same as having a storyteller or an artist in residence or an early childhood consultant or someone come in and do bush tucker experiences with children. Sure, some of our elders may do those things, but there are other people that would be identified in your stakeholders list that actually, or your community connections list, that actually do those things first. So making sure you're asking the right questions of the right people. And then, we might look at approaching and having a meeting and, so step. But then also thinking about, is our service culturally safe for community to be coming into in the first place? Do we need to do a cultural safety audit? Because if community come in and you've got disrespectful practices, they're not going to want to come back. They're not going to want to build a long-term relationship with you. So have you really thought through that? Are you coming to community unnecessarily to ask them questions that really you can source that information for yourself? So we do a lot of that stuff and a lot of that planning, and we step it out, step 1, 2, 3, 4, and then think about, well, how much time, and the time frame. It's like, well, how much time do they have? There are some services that might have 2 hours a week. Some people might have 2 hours a month. Some services haven't even gotten to the realization yet that they have to allocate time for this work to happen.
There's a lot of fleshing out of like the logistics. Hey.
And that's why it's not like a blanket approach or a checklist that's pre-made for services to do, because a lot of it is dependent on where they're at already. Like, is this service a part of their AECG? Are they already, known to the community? Are they already going to NAIDOC week events? Do they already have Aboriginal families attending their service? Because those are all variables. Do they have Aboriginal workers, as educators at the centre? So everyone's starting point is different as to how quickly they can hope to achieve these things. Do they have a budget, or do they need to go and source some funding first? Do they need to apply for innovative solutions funding to be able to fund the involvement of community to come and be at the service? So I think that's why a lot of services, they do benefit from having Aboriginal consultants like you and I to come and be a part of their working groups and to mentor them to really help the setting up and the critical reflection of how to put these things into place.
So just talking about, like, while you're talking about funding and budgets, because this is something that comes up like so much, like we want to do this stuff, we don't have the money. What do you recommend at services? So that you've mentioned the innovative solutions.
So
is that accessible to everybody, or what's the criteria for that?
It's not for preschools. So I think it's mainly long day care services. So that's through your inclusion support reps. So KU is FAST in New South Wales. And you have to have a strategic inclusion plan, so which is or otherwise known as a SIP. And in your strategic inclusion plan, if you're wanting funding for Aboriginal cultural events and so forth, you need to have a goal in there that's about that. So you're wanting to improve the cultural safety or connect with community, whatever it may be. If it's there about, you're wanting to support a Korean family that's bilingual or whatever it may be, you're not going to be able to use the funding that you get for this. So you have to be specific about what you hope to achieve in your SIP, your strategic inclusion plan. So your inclusion rep should be able to help support you in doing that. So innovative solutions funding, I believe it used to be capped at $10,000 per service, but that's now been lifted. Family daycare schemes can also apply for this funding. It has to be used for mentoring. It can't be used for professional development. So what we're talking about, workshopping, mentoring, coaching, that sort of stuff, it can be used for this, but it can also be used for things like an elder in residency program or an artist in residency program, because somebody is coming in and they're role modeling and they're mentoring and they're working alongside. So a lot of people will use, like, so say they get $10,000, they might use part of that money to work with somebody like you or I to support them in their strategy, and then they'll get community members in to help them with their implementation and their practice. So it's like a community effort, like that sort of holistic approach. It works really well. So innovative solutions funding is one. Then there's Kindy Uplift funding, which is, Queensland, they've got that. The Start Strong funding. So there's lots of different types of funding that educators can look at accessing to engage in their service. Then you've got like club grants, a lot of services will apply for club grants. But I think, if and this is, when I say this, I mean, some private services, they're entitled to innovative solutions funding for sure. However, but I mean, private service, you're a private provider. I mean, including Aboriginal perspectives is now part of our early years learning framework. It's not an optional extra. You have to do it. And collaborating with community is no longer an optional extra. You have to do it. So this is, so, you know, unfortunately, before it was based on the enthusiasm of individual educators, and they were trying to push it uphill all the time and say, well, can we please do this because we know that it's good practice. We know this, and a lot of people have been doing it for a long time already. But for other people who've been hesitant, and now it gives you the cause to go to your providers and say, hey, we actually are required to be doing this. It's mandatory. So, you know, as a part of their costing of running their service, they need to budget for that.
They need to be allocated each year. Yeah,
100%. They need to allocate a budget for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's, and I think I'm so excited, like, about the EYLF change, like the changes to the version 2. I think just exactly what you're saying, like before it was, you know, when we're talking about Aboriginal perspectives and Torres Strait Islander perspectives and cultures and things like that, it was just kind of people were passionate about it. But now it's like it's going to be highlighted to where it's like priority, where it should have been the whole time. So it's exciting. And I also think, like, I know that I also encourage services. There's a lot of grants out there too. Like there's even like a junior land care grant. We got it for our school to develop a bush tucker garden and a frog pond and all these. Like there's amazing, like, but I guess again it's time, like being able to sit down and have someone that can sit down and look through all of that. So
there's a preschool. Well, I don't want to name them because they'll probably get inundated, but like there's a preschool that I work with up north that they have somebody that it's their job one day a week to apply for grants, and they've got a bus. Their whole building has been redeveloped. Their playground's been redone. They have extra educators. They have language programs. It's all come through grants, and we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of grants this preschool's been able to get. And so it's a skill, and it's worth investing in the time to apply for some of these grants to, you know, to support the quality of program and practice that you hope to see. So I guess we've sort of answered a few of these questions in one, like, so with the deliverables, the setting up of the RAP. So the deliverables are really like those stepping stones. And that is where, like, so say with that community connections one that we've talked about, it doesn't have to be the one person that's responsible for connecting with community. It could be that could be assigned to one particular person, the overarching goal, but all those little stepping stones can be individual educators. So creating a community connections list or a stakeholders list, that could happen at a team meeting. And, you know, this particular educator is going to facilitate that and do the planning for that. You know, talking about budgeting and so forth, well, maybe that has to be assigned to the director or the owner. Talking about, you know, getting the protocols document, well, maybe this particular educator is going to go to the AECG and they're going to ask their AECG for that protocols document and feed that back. So that's how we work together as a team. Everybody is contributing. They've all doing a little bit. You know, if we all do a little bit, and sometimes I feel that big goal, so having those community connections or that artist in residency, that hasn't happened yet. And quite often educators can be disheartened because they can say, well, we haven't moved the needle on this at all. Like, you know, we're trying, but we're not getting anywhere. We haven't moved that. We haven't achieved that. But if you actually look at deliverables and what you've been able to achieve by ticking those things off, you can actually say you've had a lot of momentum and traction. And making community connections, that can take a long, long time. That's not something that can be quick because there's lots of dependencies, including, you know, how does community feel? What's the history that your service or that the Aboriginal community has had with schools and mainstream providers, you know, in that community? Have they been burnt in the past? You know, what policies and acts have affected that trauma that community carries with them as well. So there's more to it. So sometimes it takes, you know, a couple of years of showing up at NAIDOC week and reconciliation week events and community events and having a yarn before anybody wants to come to your service, you know, and work with you. So
it's about laying those foundations early on. And I think, like you're sort of saying about looking at the, you know, your culturally safe practices at your service. Because I know I went out to one of my son's preschool when he was, like, my oldest son when he was in preschool, and my partner and I went out for NAIDOC week to do some cultural stuff. And when we got there, they weren't ready for us, so we had to sit outside, but they didn't have chairs or anything, so we were sitting on the ground. And I was like, this isn't great, you know, like, we're giving up our time for free and we're sitting outside, like, on the ground, you know. So I think it's because I guess if you don't get those things right with that consultation, with, like, those protocols, all of that, like, you can I guess you can burn those bridges like pretty quickly if you're not aware of culturally safe ways of engaging with community to start with. So there is that groundwork to do, potentially, like depending on where your service is at, before you get to that step, isn't there?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, I mean, there's so much wrong with that story. Like, and you're also a family, like your child attends the service. So why isn't there an open door policy for families to come into the service at any time? Like, that's just really like, it's terrible. But anyway,
so many stories.
Oh, like, you know, so like shake your head. But I mean, that's happened a lot to us as well. Like, you know, we've gone to service and they're like, oh, you know, and there's lots, I have to say this, like most services are lovely, you know, and they greet you very warmly. Oh, can I help you? Nice to see you. Thank you so much for coming. This is where you are. Would you like a cup of tea? Like, you know, like that's really lovely. And they want to take you on a tour and show you, you know, the grounds and introduce you to other educators as they come in. And then there's others that sort of just say, oh yeah, you're in the room out the back, you know, you just got to find your way down there and set yourself up and introduce yourself to people that are coming in like really awkwardly. And it gives you that feeling that it's just like, I don't know, you feel a little bit used. Like you don't really value me or want to have a relationship. I'm just here to tick your box. And you just kind of get that really yuck feeling. And I just think, no, like, you people aren't for me, you know.
And you've got to think like, and even when you're getting to that point of like community engagement, like I know we had an elder come to our school yesterday to team teach a lesson about first contact. And you know, so like I rang him last week, talk about like, you know, what's your budget, what you know, this is what we're going to do. You know, we also pre-ran some questions by him to make sure that they were appropriate. There was one that he was like, oh, this is a bit controversial, like I'd rather not approach that subject. And then on top of that, you know, like you've got to, like, this is a local elder, you know, in his like late 60s. So like there's things like, you know, do you need a lift? Like, do you want me to, like, I'm always dropping off and picking people up, like from train stations or from their house, or, you know, even thinking about, you know, making people feel welcome, like having a cup of tea, even having like a morning tea ready for, you know, like it's just common, like to me, it's like common.
Do you have an adult sized chair for them to sit in instead of like trying to squat down low into a kid's chair? Just like really basic stuff, you know. And then there's other things that are even like that you can do further, like write them a note to say thank you so much for coming, get children to sign them a card after the fact, because
send them a photo.
Is that? You know, and I mean, you know, for elders, like, you know, make them some scones, get children to do that, write them a letter beforehand. So we're really looking forward to meeting you, like just to really let them know that you value this and you really want that relationship. And, you know, I don't know, like for services that have done that with me, I just think, oh, like you're just so lovely. And there's some services that, you know, I've met them years ago and I haven't seen them since. And then they'll reach back out and say, oh, you know, and I just think, oh, like, you know, you just never forget them because they're just so lovely and you want to work with them, you want to help them. And I still follow them on Facebook and I just think, oh, you know, you're good people. So,
but I think just there's like, you know, it's like with anything, like a relationship, when we're talking about like getting into like, you know, the deliverable is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the classroom. I think that's one of them. And then building relationships with community. It actually says under the building relationships with community that it's founded on mutual respect, trust, and inclusion. And so if you think about any form of relationship, like you're not just going to get like, even though, like it's great that we're going to pay an Aboriginal person to come out and do some kind of like incursion or whatnot, we don't want it to end there. That's not a relationship. That's a business transaction.
That's right.
You know, so like it's just like with any relationship, you're thinking, well, how am I like giving my side to this, you know? So like I know personally for me, you know, every single Aboriginal community person that comes out to or Torres Strait Islander person that comes out to our school, every event that we have, they're invited to. They get a personal invitation. We also have a bush tucker garden. So like once a month, we will like deliver stuff from our garden to like elders' houses and stuff like that. So it's like it has to be ongoing. Otherwise, it's just a one-off. But if we're talking about mutual respect and trust, we have to be able to meet them at the party of that. And then it becomes like just an ongoing thing. Then I'm just ringing elders or like community people just for a yarn and touching base. And there's maybe nothing happening for like 3 months, but you're just saying hi. And then you approach them later on for another, you know, like for something else down the track.
Yeah, 100%. Like I had a few educators years ago that came to some of my first workshops. And then, you know, they kept in touch and they'd send me messages on Facebook, oh, how are you going? Or I saw you went to such and such place. That looks really cool. And it just started with like comments on Facebook and a few messages to say, oh, that looks really great that you were doing that, or good on you, and like encouraging me. And I felt great. And then it sort of evolved. Like we would run into each other at markets and at NAIDOC week events and at reconciliation week events. They'd come up and say hello. You know, these people came to like my wedding. Now
Wow.
I'm like, and like another friend, you know, like I'm now the the godmother of her daughter, you know, and like because that's how far it's gone. Like you just like where it started as these coming to a workshop that we were running, to, you know, coming to community events and just showing up and just checking in and, you know, developing that genuine relationship. And now we're family, you know, and
that's deadly. That's awesome. And that's what, and we are like a family, you know, like when you're talking about blackfellas, like it's all, everyone's connected, you know, like it's, and I think too, like, I don't know if you struggle with this, Jess, but like sometimes I struggle, sorry, I'm going on such a tangent here, but I think like sometimes I struggle between this teacher role and the Aboriginal like community member role, and like as a person, you know, and like sort of, and blending that together. But I'm just exactly who I am outside of school, at school, you know, like it's, this is who I am. This is how I talk. Like I'm not going to change how I talk, like for whatever kind of thing. Obviously I'm going to be like a little bit more professional, but you know, like it's, we just have to be willing to like open up a bit too, and just kind of like, you know, like just be like, we want people to know who we are just as we want to know who they are.
Yeah,
you know,
that's
it's
right.
like, you know, like even though the kids might call me miss or whatever, like you know, like you don't, it's just, I don't know if that's making any sense, but I think we have to break down some barriers and connect as humans a little bit too.
I think that's 100% right. And that's where I say to people, it's, you know, like educators need to do this work, but we, you know, as community members, as Aboriginal women, we need to meet them there as well, you know. And I think what I see is that when, I don't know, I think we have like a really good like BS radar, and like we're able to discern very quickly whether you're genuine or you're not. And I feel like as soon as a community can see, even if they can look, and that's what I said, I think last episode, like even when we can see that practice might not be so great, if we can see that that person's genuinely trying to do the right thing, like you've got us in your corner. Like we're only there to support you and try and do the right thing. So, and get you to where we want you to be. So, and that's what reconciliation is. It's about relationships, about race relations, you know, it's about, you know, coming together as one to be a unified country moving forward together. So that's part of what reconciliation is. All right. So I think we've talked a lot about setting the wrap up. There's more to it, of course. Like I know that you do mentoring this space. I do mentoring this space. We also have a wrap webinar that people can watch if they want some more information about like just setting it up and some of the basic wrap actions that you can check out on the Koori curriculum website. Or if you're a club member, you have your reconciliation learning pathway as well. So there's other places you can check it out. Narragansett also often will run heaps of free reconciliation webinars, and they're really supportive. They're really great. Pick up the phone, give them a ring. You know, they'll help you set it up. Like they're more than willing to help you. If you're an organization that hasn't started the journey yet, they'll come out, they'll talk to your directors, they'll get you going with it. So they're amazing, the team there at Narragansett.
And also, Jess, the each of the wrap actions also have that tab that says professional development and ideas for action as well. So, you know, you can go down a bit of a rabbit hole there, but there's so much that can help you, like online PD, like different training and stuff as well through the platform.
It's a wealth of resources there. There is so much, and that's why I say like it actually takes time to sit there and read through it all. And that's one of the things that we sort of uncovered a few weeks ago. We were looking at the action, I think you mentioned before, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the classroom, and people can think that actually means having physically somebody there. And yes, ideally that should be. But however, during COVID, there's lots of other options because you can't always have mob there to help you. So there are, you know, like Hippie, for example, or the Healing Foundation. They have a heap of videos and resources that you can access online to have videos used. You can use story time, you know, ABC story time. Like I've been watching Uncle Jack Charles like on on repeat, read Go Home Cheeky Animals with my daughter, like on repeat, you know, so having that presence there, listening to little yarns. So, you know, doing virtual excursions with like the Australian Museum or mob like Koori connections with Jess and Knots and so forth that do that. So there are other ways that you can have that. They've even identified that having artwork and First Nations children's books in your classroom, that also is about, that it was also another way you can have Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in your classroom without having them physically be in your classroom. So thinking about outside of the box, and you know, that's why you have to read it, because just that title, it makes you think, oh, we need to have an Aboriginal person in the classroom. It's not just that. So make sure you do read through what it's suggesting that you can do with those ideas for action. So the other action that we'll quickly talk about, because we've got on big yarns, is exploring current affairs and issues. And Ree, one of our members in the KC Club, has said that this is the one that they always get the most pushback on, which makes it harder to action. And somebody else said that they wanted ideas specifically for 2 to 5 year olds with this. Like, so how could they do that with children? And another educator, Mel, said that she went straight to looking at deaths in custody, a topic we can't really explain to under fives. And then after a yarn with a colleague, she reminded me of the little things like reading Somebody's Land, sharing the apology with families and fellow educators who may not have seen it, but that was the one that she was stuck on the longest as well. So that exploring current affairs and issues, I think, seems to be tricky. What sort of things have you done with this wrap action with services?
Well, I think 2 kind of things I'm thinking when I was thinking about this morning. Firstly, I know it says about in you know, with children, like exploring with children, but I also think it's super important that staff educators have an understanding about what the current issues and affairs are, because it can also play out like in a service. You know, if there's like local issues happening, family feuds, all sorts of things that does happen within our communities, that can actually directly impact children in the service and who's coming and all that sort of stuff, right? So there's certainly, like, in terms of, you know, local issues that may be happening, but there's also, like, I was kind of thinking of it in a positive sense also, of like exploring current affairs. Well, like a perfect example for me, because, you know, I like, you know, originally when I was thinking of this, I was thinking, death of custody, that's full on. Like, I don't believe that that's appropriate to be. I don't know if you might disagree, Jess, but that's a very tricky topic to talk about, very politicized. I can see how that could have that pushback, right? Very important topic, don't get me wrong, but for the age that we're talking about. Instead, you might be looking at, like last week we had the Indigenous All-Stars game. That's like a huge event that's happening within our communities all over Australia and New Zealand. Why can't we be looking at positive issues that are happening in our communities? That's a current affair that's happening right now. Like, we're all watching it. We're talking about the dancers. We're talking about like traditional owners and where people come from. There's also like youth summits that go with it, and learning about culture and reconnecting to culture. Another one that I am really passionate about teaching about is like repatriation. I think I'm saying the word wrong. Repatriation efforts. So like, we're talking about, like, you know, the fact that traditionally, like, European people were taking like our remains, Aboriginal remains, overseas into museums, like bones and skulls and all sorts of like artifacts and things like that. And there's like huge efforts happening all over Australia at different times about, you know, like communities like fighting and advocating to have their remains of their ancestors brought home. So like, why can't we, you know, but I would be doing that sensitively in terms of like not showing those images of bones and things like that, because that's not culturally appropriate, but certainly having conversations about, you know, like what is happening like currently with that community and what the process is. There's so many, like, it doesn't have to be like you know, we face enough like adversity in our communities. We know about the statistics. We know like we're over incarcerated, and, you know, like for me, I'm always just trying to think of like, what is a positive current affair that's happening? Like, how can we explore like some amazing things? I don't know. Like, that's where I'm kind of thinking of it, Jess. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, for sure. I think like I'm all over the footy. I'm all there for the footy. Like, we were watching. I was like desperately trying to get Jessie to sleep so I could watch like the war deaths at the beginning and stuff. I was like, come on. And I had to get Brendan to record it for me. So I was like, I missed half of it. But it was it's something that like we look forward to, right? And so
Yeah,
even
my
like,
boys were dressed up, like they just went and got dressed in their own little Indigenous jerseys, and we had a party, and we got family that plays in the NRL as well, so they were just like super pumped, so
like
that's
things like
stuff
footy,
that's learning from that too.
and it's play, right, as well. So like we do things like Footy Fever Friday, where like everyone can wear like their footy jersey to school, like looking at the different Indigenous jerseys, like for Indigenous round, who's designing them this year, what's the story behind it, like showing those around. There's a new book out that Greg Dryce has illustrated called A Footy Tale by Alex Johnson. It looks like the Indigenous bunnies players and so forth. It's a really great story to read to them. There's like Footy Boots by Carlin Hakia, Hustler and stuff. So I mean, like there's great books that you could use to like springboard into. Like I just bought, it's flats like over there somewhere. It's like a Indigenous football, because exactly that, like we're footy mad in our house. And so, I won't tell you what team I go for until we're a little bit more into the season, because it's a little bit embarrassing. But just based on their performance last year.
On the ladder.
So we're just waiting. I'll share with, like, if you come to some of my sessions, you already know who it is. But I'm like anyway. So we'll see. I was like talk about me changing teams this year, because I was like, I don't know if I can keep going with this.
I feel like I know who you're going for, but we'll yarn later about it.
So anyway, we'll see. But I mean, like, the footy, we love it. So I think there's a lot of mob out there that feel the same, and like the knockout,
100%,
the knockout that we do and stuff later in the year, and that's always a big event. So think about what's happening in community. And I look, like I always tell educators to subscribe to the Koori Mail. So like the fortnightly Aboriginal
100%,
have it on the staff room table, put it in the parent library. And then, we should be exposing children to a range of different types of text, including newspapers, and exploring some of those things with them. I just watched a documentary, or part of a documentary earlier this week, which is about the Torres Strait Islands being swallowed by the sea. So like looking at the effects of climate change that's happening in our environment and stuff. So I mean, there are lots of things. So there are some topics that are more sensitive than others that, you should definitely know about them. You should be reading the reports, the Family Matters report, the Closing the Gap report. You should be reading about those things and understanding what they are. But, with some others, that you can look at it in a softer way. So, Daybreak, when it's on the lead up to Invasion Day, we always use that one by Amy Maguire. Finding the Heart of the Nation, Listen by Adam Duncan. Like there's lots of good books out there that will help you explore some of these topics and issues that are sensitive. But, you got to be age appropriate, just because like you and think about what things you need to be talking about, and to who, and to when, to why, so I mean, you use your brain. Be smart about it.
And I think like being mindful too of like that impact on families too, like on Aboriginal families that you may have, like I think it's good to be guided by that, because if you're kind of looking at like really controversial topics that maybe like some people are pushing back on, but, even like thinking about, well, what do our Aboriginal families think about, like incorporating this? Because a lot of that is like, we all got trauma. So it's like bringing those things back up can sometimes not be helpful either, like in terms of Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people too. So, you have to be like mindful, I think.
Yeah, cool. All right, guys, like we've kind of reached the end of the time we've got this podcast. It was a great yarn, and I hope you guys have found it interesting, and some things that you can take away to relook at your RAP, or start your RAP journey, or have a look at the setup of your actions and see if you're able to implement some of the things that we've shared with you today. If there are RAP actions or questions that you have about your RAP that you would like us to do an episode on or address in one of our yarns that are coming up, then you can put it in the comments, send us a DM. Belinda's at Freshwater Education and I'm at Koori Curriculum, so you can DM us both there, or send us an email. And we'd love to make more episodes based on what you are needing to know more about, so we can get this information out there. So thanks for listening in.
Stay deadly.